Welcome to the Caffeine Stream on Caffeine and Philosophy.
Hello everyone, welcome to the Caffeine Stream. My name is C.V. Robertson. This is episode 28, and today I've been coerced / cajoled into doing just a generic podcast about marriage. Cajoled by whom, you might ask? Well, who else but one's spouse in the context of marriage? She has a lot to say about this subject, but I do want to bring in some structure and some organization to this topic, because it does feel like a big topic in today's day and age. And there are a lot of challenges and new questions surrounding this very ancient institution. And it's worth asking and taking seriously the question, is marriage even worth it anymore? Is it a good idea to get married anymore? Being a married couple, I would say it's we're both strongly in the yes camp on that question, but it's worth it's worth taking the counter arguments seriously, given the social and cultural and also legal changes. It's hard not to have a little bit of sympathy for men in particular, but I would say also for women for different reasons after the the onset of no fault divorce, and you can't ignore the contraception question either, which has changed things in first, second, and third order dimensions. Not just the importance of fidelity at that biological level, but also the hormonal changes that have come about as a result of certain pills and differences and preferences that brings about, and so on and so forth. So, I may as well bring you in here. Do you have any sympathy or thoughts on the people who have become marriage skeptics these days?
I certainly do. I think I fall into that category of honey badgers. I am very pro man. I love men. Men are great. You guys are awesome. Just as a category. You do all the yucky, scary, awful, cold, also hot stuff that I don't want to do. And I get to stay in the house and take care of children, and it's great. So thank you on behalf of women. If you haven't heard lately, men are awesome. But specifically, you are the best of all the men. I like you more than all men and also all women. You're the best person. And I hope that everyone could maybe find those people. And I realize that it may sound like hard to find, to find the best of all people and then marry that person. So my sympathies, if you have not yet found your most perfect other person, because it's hard. My brother is currently trying to find himself anybody to date, and post-pandemic in a digital world, as a young man who, it's hard to even give him advice, because I'm like, everyone in your family was married and had children by your age, so we don't know what you're doing at all. And also, none of us had to use apps the way that you're doing, and none of us are trying to communicate with people via swipeable apps and things. I literally don't know how you guys are doing it.
Oh yeah, the social dynamic change is also tremendous. We have this horrible situation where we're being exposed to so many more people, such a larger percentage of the global population, that it creates this sense of there are plenty of fish in the sea. There's always more people. A sort of in pickup artist circles, they talk about having an abundance mindset, which I think is great. But there's a pathological version of the abundance mindset where you're unwilling to commit to anything for fear of missing out on your other. Oh, there's probably a better option out there somewhere. And so not only are you seeing a greater percentage of really, really, really high tier people, just like supermodel attraction. They make millions of dollars. They're super charming. And so the, nice next door boy or, librarian girl that you otherwise would have had an interest in now seems like a fallback plan. Now seems like, it's like a backup option, and no one wants to be that person. No one wants to be someone else's backup. So just the exposure to a greater number of people has changed things, has changed people's willingness to commit.
Yeah.
And but I think to add one final point, I think what you were talking about like, oh my gosh, men are so great, they're going out and willing to do hard things. I think that kind of aesthetic approach to just leaning into and loving the virtues of the opposite sex, because if you think about things too pragmatically, too practically, to like, what's my ROI on this date choice, you will fall into that plenty of fish trap. But if you view things from that, I will say, higher kind of aesthetic, virtue oriented, I want to find some, as Stefan Molyneux used to say, I want to find someone to love, quoting Queen. It becomes way easier and doable to find someone to commit to, and you discover that with that little mindset shift, God, they're everywhere.
I was going to say too that there's something, what you were saying before, like the plenty of fish in the sea phenomenon, and just like girls who you meet in your neighborhood, or like the girl you were in love with in high school doesn't cut it anymore, is very culturally reinforced by a lot of people who will be like, oh, you're going to get married, and you're only 20 and she's 19 and you guys are high school sweethearts. Like, don't you want to see if there's anybody else out there? Like, people will say that to you. And it's like, no, I'm in love with this person. Yeah. Like, that should be good enough. That was good enough for people who were married for 50 or 60 years, who never left their hometowns and married girls who were local and had virtually everything in common, and who ended up having very successful marriages. But today, you even will have your own like friends and family members will try to encourage you to keep looking, to keep checking other things out. And before we go into other things, I also want to provide a little caveat, which is I think it's really easy to look at a pair like Chris and I, and come to the conclusion that like, well, it was easy for you guys. You clearly are like made for each other, or something like that. Like, oh, well, it was easy for you two. And I just want to reiterate how very kismet lucky it is that we got together. We don't need to go over our entire like romantic history story of how we found each other, but like the gist is two fundamentally politically conservative, very like outside lateral thinking, weird esoteric nerds found each other in very bougie, upscale, liberal Seattle suburb community college context, and managed to find each other in that milieu of people who
debate clubs specifically.
Yes. Which is like the peak of, is that doesn't just like, if you've listened to this podcast and you've heard us talking to each other and you're not like, oh yeah. That like, it makes sense.
Just a tangent. If you want to know how liberal this is, they were talking about eating the bugs in 2013. They were so ahead of the curve. It's mind blowing in retrospect.
If you ever actually, the community college that we both attended, was also the model for the show Community, which was a show about attending community college. And I cannot tell you how accurate that is. Both in the like, we're the human beings, like that kind of crap. It's
the butthole flag.
Like, honestly, like, I think Bellevue College was already on the front lines of, like, I mean, you were talking about this when you were writing for the Watchdog at the college, that they were at the cutting edge of all of this, like, inclusivity, and they were some very early adopters of, DIE, the diversity, inclusion, and terrible ideas. I can't come up with the E.
They were adopting bias incidents as a policy before the Foundation for Individual Rights in Education even began writing about it.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah. So that's the cultural context. That's the platform on which Chris and I managed to find ourselves out of a student body of 40,000. And, obviously, like, we chose debate club and blah, blah, blah. But, like, even within that, I mean, you and I were the only people having, and you weren't even very right wing at that time. I was like the standout right winger who's like, I voted for the Tea Party. And everyone was like, what are you doing here?
No, I was like a default liberal who had discovered Christopher Hitchens.
Douglas Murray was the one that you were on when I met
Douglas Murray was the introduction, was the where it started all going downhill from there. It was Douglas Murray. I don't even remember who it was after that. I think it was straight to Milo after that.
Oh, God. Well, it was all just right-wing degeneracy from there. So... no, I recall that being one of the pivotal moments where you and I were like, maybe this is a thing, possibly someday. When I said the phrase as a Republican and then finished that sentence. And you had literally never in your life heard someone say that out loud. You thought that was the most courageous thing you'd ever heard, that someone would say that out loud.
Especially at a debate club. Which is the left-wing component of the left-wing school.
Right. So the point in telling you this is all just to say, it's not like, yes, it all worked out, but it's not like it was necessarily a given that we were going to find each other. Like, we did find each other, but part of the reason we found each other is because we went out to where the people are. And the bigger the group of people, the more likely you will find anybody who you can talk to until you eventually find somebody worth talking to forever. But
and that's the funny thing. We would never have discovered how similar we were if we hadn't been talking to each other and also other people. Like, you people say, "Oh, there's no one like that out there for me." They might or might not be correct. But if there were 10 people out there at the rock climbing gym that they want to go to but haven't, but they never talk to any of them, they would never know.
And also, if you never go to the rock climbing gym, you will never, ever know. Yeah. You have to go out and see the people. So
even bars are, like,
something.
even the cool people go to bars. People say, "Oh, the quality people's down." No, it's not.
So we could certainly go on and on about our opinion on how to find somebody, but more to zoom back out to the esoteric where we feel comfortable. That's the caveat I would provide as you continue with this conversation, is that, like, it was not, I don't think it was ever a given that we were going to find each other, and finding each other was awesome, and I'm so glad I have him now, and I would not let you go for the world. I will make many versions of you that I will raise to be just like you. It's going to be great. But if you are still looking for those people, or if you're not sure that you can find those people, maybe we need to talk about the value of marriage and if you should even be trying.
Yeah. Well, and that's correct. And I think we haven't really adequately addressed the arguments against marriage, because there are very intelligent people who look at the prospect of marriage and say, well, that's great that it's worked out so far for you. And we should note that, we've been married for 6 years, which is, and we've known each other for 9?
Yeah.
So, like, we are not experts in this field. We haven't taken, like, credentialed courses on marriage or anything like that. However, I think we've both done a fair bit of research sort of on our own, sort of glorified Googling of the subject and watching hundreds of hours of YouTube videos about marriage and so forth. And also, like, there are a tremendous number of people who come to very strong opinions on marriage who have not been married, or in the construction world where I work, who were married for 2 years or 3 years before they got divorced, and draw broad conclusions about marriage and the prospects of marriage and the probabilities of marriage from that fairly small experience. So against that kind of opinion, 6 years of, I would say, fairly successful marriage.
if you're going with just the number of humans on Earth to replace us, extremely successful.
I was thinking successful in terms of not getting divorced, but also
that.
Also that, yeah. Like we do have at least that degree of credibility, I would say. So,
and we don't have a crystal ball or anything, but like I not to sound like the very, nervous people that you're talking about, but like I can't fathom that there could be another person better than you that I would rather be with besides you. Barring your sudden and spontaneous death, I can't fathom being with anybody else. Yeah. But, it's we're not experts. We're laying it out as we know what we know so far. And so, this is what we've gleaned so far.
Yeah, and I would say I think you're giving me a little too much credit. I think so much of our marital success has been who marriage has forced us as individuals to become, such that if I were to die suddenly, which would be sad for you, not for me.
Very sad.
Not for me, but for you. Like at some point, who you have become would make you very good wife material for another person. It wouldn't be like you'd have a hard time to find someone like.
Yes, laden down with 5 children might be a little more time consuming. You'd have to take the minivan to the date.
Right. So that might make it tricky. But like as far as character goes, sure. The point is who you become within the context of a good marriage is. And I want to be very careful here because I think our view is that it's very much not universal, that all marriages are a little different, and that a good marriage is one that you negotiate with the other person, not based on some, credentialed concept of best practices, but what you two have built on your own apart from those people trying to tell you the best way to do things. That said, there is a degree of universality to the virtues of a good spouse. I always love that Christopher Hitchens line about, what's most attractive in a man is to a degree, not his tendency, but his ability to think like a woman and vice versa. A woman who has the ability to think like a man, that sort of cross gender empathy is, I don't know about attractive, but definitely necessary and powerful within the context of a relationship.
And it's a skill that needs to be learned. And the thing that's tricky about it is that, I think to kind of get back to the subject of like, how do you, like, is it worth it to get married? In a
keep getting off that. Yeah.
In a sense, I feel like the most important part there is, I think as humans, who are mammals, who are social, right? Like apes, they are social. They live in groups. Humans are social, and we are built to be in relationship with people. And there are certainly exceptions to the rule, and everyone likes to believe that they are the exception for whatever number of reasons. You're probably not exceptional. You probably need to be in deep relationship with at least one other person who really also deeply cares about you. And even if you end up choosing, and we're not super stoic in our attitudes about anything. So like, if you're 2 dudes and you want to deeply connect with each other and be in relationship for your lives, great. Like, you do you. The phenomena of wanting to pair up with somebody and know them deeply and be known deeply, I think it's a very, very deep human motivation. I think everyone wants that. And it is the very, very rare exception who doesn't need it. Yeah. I think a lot of people have learned to live without it, but I don't think anyone can. Very, very few people don't need it.
I'll share a personal little anecdote. Back when I was in my early 20s, as a concession to my parents, I went to some counseling over a supposed video game addiction. I loved this counselor. He was freaking awesome. And we very quickly established within like 2 meetings, like, oh yeah, this is not a problem. And we hit it off, and we would just talk about all kinds of stuff. We would talk about everything. But the big thing I remember taking away from these counseling sessions was the counselor himself was this very charming old Irishman who was in his 60s. And he expressed that he was, feeling kind of lonely. And he was actually in the dating market trying to find someone to be with. And I remember sitting there, I was like 22 or something, and being like, man, this guy is so cool, but I never want to be in this situation of being old and alone in your old age. And it would be one thing if you had a spouse and then they died and you're just living it out. But like he never even got the chance to have that kind of deep bond in the first place. Mm-hmm. What a terrible place to be. And so my takeaway was probably more valuable even than dealing with video games. It was this idea of, it was this greater existential, what do I not want to be stuck with at the end of my life, looking back? And I think that's the important point I would want to convey to people who are looking at the matter of marriage probabilistically. They're saying, yes, it's possible to have a good marriage, but like, what are the odds? I can't know someone perfectly when I first date them. They could hide certain aspects or character proclivities from me for years. And things
could develop that you weren't there when you started.
Exactly. And I could end up screwed. I could lose half my stuff. I could, or worse, I could end up in prison over some total fabrications. And I would say, yes, that's all true. That is a risk that you take. But at the same time, like, there are risks of that nature that you can't avoid as a function of being alive in an unpredictable world that have nothing to do with marriage. Like, you could, was that Indian guru guy? You get hit by a bus tomorrow. No one cares. It's like there's so many things that can go wrong in life, and life is not just risk mitigation. Mm-hmm. This is this horrible liability culture we've accepted in America, where like everything is driven by insurance companies, really.
Well, and also it's got a utilitarian quality to it also. This like, I need to make sure that I have a good life, that things work out well. And anybody in any, you dig into a smaller context and you'll immediately find people who are like, any business venture worth pursuing comes with a lot of risk. You might lose it all. This might not work out. Any, major, like, there are these guys who go out and do like crazy rock climbing things, and they free climb, thousands and thousands of feet up these rock faces that have never been climbed before. And when they die, people will be like, oh, he was just, looking for, a death wish. And it's like, no, man, anything that's really, really incredible and worth doing comes with the parallel of risk, right? There is some amount of risk.
And so when you compare the possibilities of pursuing marriage versus not pursuing marriage, if you pursue marriage, so you start trying to talk with women or men and going on dates, you will invariably make mistakes of smaller or greater measures. And if they're small mistakes, you learn from them over time and hopefully you progress. And maybe you get married or maybe you fail. But whether you succeed or fail after you decide to try is essentially a matter of luck. So when you are, on your deathbed looking back, will it have been better to have not tried and retained a degree of security? And so now you're like, I don't know, you have a lot of toys, you're rich and alone. Or would it have been better to have tried and failed? And by fail, I mean literally got unlucky. Because remember, like, failing is also the path to learning. Right. So it's either, would it be better to have tried and gotten unlucky, or would it be better to have not tried and feel the weight of what could have been, but you didn't try?
Yeah, the unpursued. I think on a mechanistic sense, like, we're not so stodgy as to say that like marriage that is before the state and signed by, and recognized by your state and government and blah, 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 is the only form of marriage. I will say that almost every culture has some kind of codification of the relationship. And I think there are a lot of, I think it would not even be, controversial to say that humans, as a rule, in an not anthropomorphic, but in just an anthropological, zoological sense, humans are pair-bonded mammals who sexually procreate and feed their babies with milk until they are old enough to go out on their own. Like, humans, more than any other primate, like, care for their children and keep them much longer than other animals. That stuff takes time, and it takes the commitment and the resource commitment of multiple, at least 2 people, ideally, frankly, an extended family, but that may or may not be present. Yeah. But the point is that, dude, there are heroin addicts who manage to find somebody. They may not ever get married. They may be strung out most of the time, but somehow those 2 are always together. You know what I mean? Like, you know who I'm talking about. We all know of the, like, on again, off again, but always together somehow, just complete derelicts. Those people exist. And so I'm not saying that you need to lower your standards to heroin addicts, but I am saying that, like,
if even they can do it.
If even they can do it, they're so driven. Humans, as a general rule, are so driven to be...
Or stuck, in their case.
are so driven to be together with somebody. And generally one somebody. I don't think we're necessarily going out on a huge limb to say that, like, we are not really buying a lot of these, like, polyamory relationships or any of these, like, harem setups or, like, whatever. I don't want to commit to anybody. I've got, like, multiple people, whatever. Good luck with that, my friend. But
yeah, it's a very, like, the polyamory thing strikes me as very utilitarian and, like, pathologically rational. Like, I can't rationally explain why this shouldn't work, so I'm just going to abandon what's been tried and true, not just at a cultural level, but at a species level. And the harem thing always struck me as a very cynical, almost like a meme response to just depression with exceptions to established trends. Like, marriage is no longer sacred because divorces happen, so screw modernity, white Sharia now or whatever. Like, okay, dude, good luck with that. You try being Andrew Tate. I don't even know if Andrew Tate is Andrew Tate. But
well, and I like, it also, I think, belies the fact that those kinds of relationship setups neglect the other aspects of human nature that are really, really powerful draws for almost everybody. The desire to procreate, and you really do need at least 2 committed people who are, investing either in their physical presence or in their, monetary and support resources to pour into those kids consistently. And you're just not going to get that other, human and mammalian inevitability is not going to be achieved by people who you're not consistently financially and, like, through living together and being together, investing in. That you're not going to have children in those contexts, and you're certainly not going to have healthy, successful children in those contexts if you bring them there.
Totally, which feels like a good segue to talk about what marriage is as it relates to pair bonding, because marriage and pair bonding aren't exactly the same thing. Mm-hmm. And it's worth bringing in a anthropological concept, or set pair of concepts called R selection and K selection. So when anthropologists, or is it anthropologists or biologists? I think biologists, because they talk about other animals. Talk about R selection, I always think R for rabbit. R selected species are animals that don't put a lot of time and energy into their young. They go for quantity over quality. And this is usually because the animals have very little control over what we'll call selective pressures in their environment. Mm-hmm. So, like hawks, if you're a rabbit, So, like, we'll go for quantity here because some will get snatched away and there isn't really much to do. And if we invest too much in our kids, it'll be wasted calories. Yeah. So A K-selected animal, though, and these tend to be predators, but not always. Think like a wolf. They don't just gestate longer in the mother, and often breastfeed longer. They also will take the time to train their offspring, and often the father is involved as well. It's like a
sometimes extended family.
Extended family. It's a serious investment, and the hope is that that investment will leave the offspring better off, and the lineage will benefit as a result. And there's great pride in having offspring that are excellent. So, people who are, shall we say, how do I say this without using any freaking dog whistles these days? Screw it, I'm just going to do it. Who pride themselves on being high agency, of taking control of their own life and their own destiny. You're going to want to lean towards the K-selected side. Mm-hmm. You're going to want to be a little bit more intentional, not just with your own life, but also with your offspring's life, because they are you. They are the most existentially significant thing you will ever do. Nothing you do will be as existentially significant as the people you leave behind. Now, that doesn't mean that every single person needs to have children or their life is a waste, but it does mean that if you do have children, I'd be hard-pressed to find anything more important to do in that regard. And so marriage, as it relates to pair bonding, seems to be this deep, ritualized enshrining of the pair bond, above and beyond the natural inclination.
Yeah. I agree with that completely. I think, I'm libertarian and hippie woo-woo enough to be like, you can have your solar ceremony alone in the woods with you and a few handful of friends, if that's what speaks to you.
Let's not bash solar.
I'm not bashing anything solar on that at all. I'm dead serious. If what is most meaningful to you and is the codification of your relationship is standing under an oak tree and having a seance, do it. I'm not picky about it needs to be agreed upon with the government, because I recently had this realization that the thing about how do I say this quickly? A lot of people will say that the reason to get married is because, if you ever get divorced, it'll be neater. There's a contract there, so it's easier to divide resources. The other side of the coin on that is, if you can't sort it out with your own spouse or your own soon-to-be ex-spouse on your own, the government or some other agent gets to now decide how this is going to shake out. And now other agents besides just you guys are involved in making this decision. So it cuts both ways. If you don't want to get married in the eyes of the state, that's fine. I don't care. The point to me, and I think this is what is anthropologically true over most of history, is you can't fall backwards into a committed relationship that's worth anything, that means anything, and that will have any endurance. It doesn't matter what the social or cultural hoops are that you have to jump through in order to do that codification, but you're not going to fall into a successful relationship casually not putting a name on anything. At some point, somebody has to call out, I want to be with you. We should do XYZ things that matter to us to codify that this is a relationship that is going to be enduring until one of us, dies or at all.
Yeah, totally. And the state is an important subject in this, because I think a lot of the people who have become skeptical about marriage are skeptical precisely because of the state's involvement and the way that's biased things on the surface towards women. But I think there are ways that it hurts women as well that are a little more second order. But I think the problem with, and I have really a book to write on this subject. The whole problem with deferring this contract to the state, or delegating it, I should say, upward to the state, as a third party is that it takes a degree of intimacy out. It inserts a third party into your marriage that, some people say that strengthens your marriage. And it would be interesting to see some empirical tests on this. I don't know how you'd run empirical tests on this, but I think having third parties, whether that's the state or religion stuff,
or your mother-in-law.
Yeah, well, now I'm thinking it gets weird because there are some things that bring you together if you're shoulder to shoulder on, but in terms of conflict resolution, which is like a different matter, I think an arbitrating higher authority separates you in a certain way.
Not least of all because those arbitrating, I don't know how to conjugate that.
Yeah.
Bodies are going to use things like precedent, which have nothing to do with you. And that
it's deeply impersonal.
It's deeply impersonal, and it does put you at risk for a lot of some real garbage. I mean, I think the thing is, I don't think anybody wins in divorce. I think there are obvious, father influence losers, men having to pay maintenance or child support, whatever it's called in your state, because, children were made out of your relationship, that now he's responsible for forever, even if it's unbelievably cost ineffective for you to be putting up two households. Like, yeah, there are some serious costs there, and those things mostly exist because the state got involved. Now, the tricky thing is, common law relationships also exist, and so there's a potential, depending on how things fall apart, if it does fall apart, that you're going to be, subject to these stupid rules anyway. The point, though, as far as I'm concerned, is that like you were saying before, there's really no chance for success. Like, you don't get to a 50-year-long marriage without having had year one, without having had a wedding, without having dated somebody. So, a long journey starts with, putting your shoes on and going outside. And you don't necessarily know what's going to happen. Because, I mean, obviously, like, I have no intention of leaving you. But, like, I don't know. I could get breast cancer. Like, all kinds of completely unforeseen stuff could happen that would completely change, like, the trajectory of our relationship. That, those other outside consequences, like, I guess what I would say is I don't have an asteroid plan for what happens if an asteroid strikes and takes out you, but not me.
I have a good friend, probably my best friend over the last 10 years, who is fond of saying that life is not like chess where all the information is visible. It's a lot more like poker, and all you can do is play the best hand that you have. And as you are fond of saying, and this is one of, I think, your favorite, my favorite coinages of yours is you can't play test commitment. Yeah. At the end of the day, you have no choice as a living human being on this earth but to commit to something. Your only choice is, what am I going to commit to? If you're going to commit to security and to commit to non-commitment,
low risk,
like that will manifest over time. Like, you will, what I mean by that is you will reap the rewards of that commitment, which you can say, oh, it's not a real commitment, but like a certain lifestyle you will receive a certain life as a result of that choice. And the choice to do that is different than the choice of taking the risk of marriage. And as we were saying before, zero risk isn't on the table.
Well, yeah, and it is a cost benefits analysis to decide what tables you want to play at, for sure. And you can choose the ones with the most predictable outcomes. But like, if none of us are making it out of alive, like I for one would like to die holding the hand of somebody biologically related to me, not a nurse who was paid to be there. That, for me, is a very, like, it's macabre, but it is a very driving motivation for why I have chosen the life I've chosen. Similar to your, like, dude in his 60s who seems great, but somehow has managed to go 66 decades without finding somebody to pair bond with. You don't, the institutions per se, the mechanisms that codify it or whatever, can be whatever they are for either you and your culture or you and your person who you're with. Like, by all means, if you guys come from cultures that do, XYZ behaviors and you're like, we don't want to, we don't want to be the wasps that our parents are, so you're going to do like whatever you want. Fine. Agreeing to that decision and talking that through with that person and then making a life around it. That exercise is kind of inherently valuable. The thing about everything that I think this is a grandiose statement. I think a lot of people forget that everything is good and bad. So like, yes, do I live with a man who can't close the cabinet doors? 100% I do. And I love him, but he cannot close cabinet doors.
I like to argue I can, I just choose not to.
This is a true statement. But the benefits for me, the things that I value, the things that are good in life that matter to me, I get more of than cabinets closed, and that's fine. Like the bad things, the tedious things, the things that are annoying about being in a relationship with another person are going to, like, when you're married, you have another person who's annoying. When you're alone, it's just you. And the annoying thing is that you're alone. So you're going to have things that are shades of bad in whatever choice you make. For me, choosing to be with him and choosing to be with him on purpose and for the purpose of having kids and building a life that we want together is so much good that I'm willing to take those bads and also the unknown risks.
And it's also not a quantitative question. It's also a qualitative question, because before we were dating, I was a long haul truck driver. Mm-hmm. I drove over the road for a grand total of 2 years, sort of separated out in a couple different times. And I got to say, as a married man, my life as an over the road truck driver was less stressful. There was petty pleasures that made it fun and enjoyable. Just driving itself, listening to audiobooks. I'd go out, work out. I'd go on long walks in the desert in like Nevada and Arizona. I would, go to bed when I wanted to. It was actually a very great life for a bachelor. Now, as a married man and a father, I wake up early. I go to work, which is sort of stressful. I come home and immediately there's the stresses of the household that face me upon getting home. And I get maybe an hour and a half, maybe, usually not that much, to myself between the chores and the obligations to family. And then I go to bed and do it all again. If you look at it at a purely quantitative level, the math would favor being a truck driver and not being married. Like, that's the better life. But as a truck driver, there was nothing I wanted more than where I am now. And I don't yearn for those days, even though they were on paper like more like better in a utilitarian sense. There's, I think, for all the criticisms there might be of Jordan Peterson, I think I can't thank him enough for bringing the attention of a large subset of the public out of what makes you happy and into what makes life meaningful. Mm-hmm. And out of the sort of emptiness of pleasure, which I think everyone above a certain level of intelligence will get very like not just sick of, but actually hateful of over time. The emptiness of that.
Well, and I also want to bring it back to kind of reaching to where people who are not yet married might be. We're recording this on Christmas Day because this is when we finally have some time and are able to do some podcasts, and I encourage you to sit down and do a podcast with me. But Christmas is a particularly poignant time where we will see a lot of our what we're going to call our sad single friends posting about how they're sad and single on Christmas, and it definitely makes us glad that we are married.
It's heartbreaking, and it brings me back also to my days truck driving, where 98% of the time, I was super happy. And 2% of the time, it was just painfully lonely. It wasn't very much as a percentage, but the depth of that loneliness was pretty deep and profound. And I'm sure other single people out there, as happy as they are most of the time, can probably relate to that.
And so I wanted to speak to kind of the MGTOWs and the people who are choosing to be happy in their solitude, and who are, for whatever combination of reasons, trying to insist that they're not that 2% of deep existentially dread sad. And I get that. I understand it conceptually. I think there's something to be said for asking yourself really in a serious way if your insistence that you like your hobbies and that you like having, being alone, that you like, your roommate situation is fine, that you don't really care whether you get a wife, you don't really care whether you have kids. Is that because you are reassuring yourself that you are happy when you're sad?
Yeah.
Or is that because there are certainly...
Is it sour grapes?
Is it sour grapes? Or is it... No, it's not sour grapes. Is it you trying to find some aspect of, like, not just falling forever into that pit of despair, and you're trying to reassure yourself that you're okay? Or are you actually in that very, very rare, small niche percentage of people who actually really don't need anybody? Because I think a lot of us will sometimes, because we haven't found anybody yet, we'll tell ourselves that I didn't want anybody anyway, because I like being alone. That's certainly the bitter 30-year-old women.
I'm an introvert.
Yeah, I definitely see a lot of these like bitter 30-year-old, 30, 35, 40-year-old women who are like, I'm having a great time, and me and my cat and my roommate are just fine here. And I'm not going to lower my standards because, whatever, men, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, look, on a social media feed sense, I get that you're just trying to hype yourself up so that you can not have to commit suicide in your bath tonight.
Or advertise yourself to potential people online.
But also, honey, are you actually happy, or are you just trying to reassure yourself that you're not desperately depressed?
Yeah, exactly. And I do want to acknowledge the people out there who did get married and who were miserable in their marriage, and then they got divorced and they were significantly happy after their divorce. That is a real thing, and it's true. And I think that's just one of those components in our risk conversation we were talking about before. It's like, yes, that's a possibility, just like essentially like divorce that we were talking about before, but it doesn't speak to the proper end of a human being. And what you're talking about there is getting back to zero from a negative, not getting to something truly positive in an existential kind of way. That's not happiness. That's just not being totally miserable. And true happiness, and this is also fairly I hate appealing to science here, but it is scientifically supported. I want to say the Stanford longitudinal study that happiness really comes from deep, meaningful connections, and especially intergenerational connections. Mm-hmm. Now, speaking of familial connections, we are being summoned upstairs and can't stay for too long.
Yes, by our downward levels of the familial chain. I want to conclude on that a little bit, because there's, I think, an entire additional pair podcasts on our what wisdom we have so far gleaned about marriage that we can possibly share with other people. I don't think we've figured out the solution to marriage, but I think we have figured out a lot of strategies that could be applicable to, hang on, I want to finish my thought. It could be applicable to other people as strategies that could be used by anyone. And the thing about getting divorced or a lot of people will talk about like, well, we just grew apart. And it's like, sure, you probably did. But I would parry that with saying, you know, we can't necessarily control what our partner does. You know, we can't prevent them from getting sick. We can't prevent them from getting in a car accident. And we also can't prevent them from choosing not to grow as people, to choose to be bitter and sad, to choose to have negative thoughts when they could have positive thoughts. We can't control those things about another person. And there's nothing that you can do in your marriage to make that person be a certain kind of way. But you can make yourself be the best version of yourself you can be. And you can try, to whatever degree you have the capacity, to love them as deeply as possible. And that's really all you can do. If you are truly putting a good faith effort into being a good person and a healthy, well-rounded person, and you're truly putting, you know, effort into trying to love the other person as they are without trying to change them, but because you actually love them, it's the only insurance you really can, it's the only insurance you can try to offer to protect yourself against a marriage that fails. And if you do all of that and it still falls apart, like, you know, you are a better person even for having put that effort in, just because you put that effort in, even if it doesn't necessarily work out. And that's something that growth as a person is the kind of like iron sharpening iron development that really needs to happen, even if it doesn't work out. A lot of people practice a long, long time, and then they go to their sporting event where they are here to compete and they still lose. But we aren't going to say that the time you spent, you know, training wasn't worth it.
Yeah. And I think that's a good way to conclude this podcast, is that like, there's no way to do the utilitarian calculation in a way that will give you any conclusive option. If you choose to get married on utilitarian grounds, you're just being optimistic. And if you choose not to get married on utilitarian grounds, you're just being pessimistic. At the end of the day, it comes down to an aesthetic choice of what kind of person do you want to be? Do I want to be the person who tried, essentially? And you can't control the outcome, but you can control the effort you put into it. And we only have one life to live. And so I think our argument at the end of the day is that for all the risks that modernity has brought with it into marriage, it's still worth the risk to try. It's still worth the risk, and it won't work out for many people. But
and in an existential sense, it won't work out for any of us because they have not invented cryogenic freezing. We're all dying at the end of this.
Well, that doesn't mean you can't have a successful marriage. I think, but point taken. But nevertheless, I think the case for marriage is ultimately not a utilitarian one, in that it's like worth it. You will be happier in a like hedonic units kind of way than you would be if not. Although I think that is certainly true for many people, but rather marriage is worth pursuing because it's more meaningful and it's a higher direction to orient your life in accordance to than just how do I cover my ass best.
Yeah. I think humans are driven to be pair bonded, and the best way to do it, if you want to achieve any significant aims in our more than, you know, mammalian or more than simian social groups, is through some kind of codified relationship. And I think you'll probably fall into being around somebody, but that relationship would be made better by choosing to be with that person and choosing to be with them well. And
to lean into that choice as an aesthetic expression of love, which we want to express in the world. So I think that's how we'll have to conclude it. The calls are getting desperate upstairs. So thank you so much for listening. Talk to you all later.